French bonds and stocks are steadier today, but is this just the calm before the storm? Welcome to Market Insight, I'm Ramzan Karamali. Well, France's finance minister says the government is ready to make concessions over next year's budget. Antoine Armand made the comments as concerns continue to grow over whether Prime Minister Michel Barnier's administration could be toppled if far-right and leftist foes force a no-confidence vote. Thanks to today's US Thanksgiving holiday, bonds and stocks were more stable after Wednesday's sharp falls. But should we expect more investors to turn away from Europe's second largest economy? Well, to help answer that and more, I'm joined by Vicky Pryce, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Vicky, thanks so much for joining us. Well, Greece was at the centre of the 2012 Eurozone debt crisis, and France's borrowing costs briefly rose above those of Greece today. So how worried should we be of another kind of event just like that?
I think perhaps the first thing to point out is that at the time of the Eurozone crisis, if you look at particularly the height of it for Greece anyway, in July 2015, two-year bond yields were over 50%. I think it was something like 57%. So we've come a long way down from that. And I'm speaking to you as it happens from Athens right now, where the Greeks, I think, are slightly sort of incensed in looking at headlines which say, oh, France's yields have gone up to Greece's levels, when of course we're talking about very low levels. So in fact, France 10-year bond yield is just under, the last time I looked, at 3%. Greece's is just slightly above. So more or less the same. But I think the issue is the gap between France and Germany, which matters more, where we have a sort of 90 basis points difference, which seems to be there and doesn't seem to be shifting very much. And it might get worse, it might get better, depending indeed on whether some of the budget issues in France are resolved. And remember, there is a big issue there. The deficit to GDP ratio is likely to be over 6% for 2024, unless something is done to bring it down to at least 5% and then move further down, as France has to do under the EU rules. Then something will have to give. And we do know that indeed concessions may come about at some point, but I think what Le Pen and her party are pushing for, and they might bring the government down if they don't get it, is issues like a tax on electricity bills, which is meant to rise quite significantly, and also, of course, cuts in public spending, particularly on the health side, even though, of course, the government, President Barnier's government, is stressing that it's all really going to be paid mostly by whatever changes there are by the wealthier and in the country, and it's not really going to affect the middle classes very much. But if you just look at some of the details, you wonder if that's true.
But this is all about reducing the deficit, as you say. But what else can Michel Barnier's government do? They're sort of tied here in what they can do because of the EU's rules, no?
Well, yes, it's true. I mean, France has been put under sort of the deficit reduction or procedures, those that are there to ensure that the countries follow what they have said they were going to do to reach the sort of 3%, which seems to have been semi-reintroduced with the Stability and Growth Pact, which had been thrown out of the window during COVID and for a period also during the beginning of the energy crisis. But there have been times when through this is a deficit reduction procedure, France has been fined and then nothing happens. Italy has gone through the same process. So the question is, how much does it matter? Perhaps where it does matter is in terms of what the markets do and the cost of government debt. And if the markets think that you don't have a sustainable path for reducing the deficit and your debt, then they'll punish you by just expecting higher interest rates for whatever it is that they lend you. And I think that's their problem.
Now, Europe's also facing more problems next year with Donald Trump's tariff plans. And in an interview with the FT, the ECB President Christine Lagarde said a trade war was not in anyone's interest. So how should Europe deal with Trump?
Well, we all know that a trade war doesn't help at all. It brings growth for the world economy down. It brings prices possibly up in a number of places, depending on how that trade war is in fact undertaken in terms of what the tariffs might do. But the interesting thing with Lagarde's comments, which I did find actually rather surprising, is let's talk to Trump and buy a few more of US goods, which seems odd. If we don't need those goods, then what's the point? And if they're not competitive, what's the point? And we have seen anyway the US becoming more protectionist progressively. It was protectionist under Biden as well. And if you just look at the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the investment that was encouraged in the US as a result of this, rather than buying from abroad, well, it's a bit difficult to counter this, but just offering to buy, I don't know what exactly. LNG, yes, we do buy loads of it. In fact, since the war in Ukraine, it's been one of the very big exports of the US, which has in many ways flattered their own current account figures.
Now, looking ahead to Friday, we get inflation data out of the Eurozone. Could we see evidence sort of mount up here to make policymakers feel like a 50 basis point cut is the next move?
Yes, I think we are seeing a little bit of an increase in inflation happening. It happened in the UK, of course. It happened in the US a little bit with the data we just saw. It's also happening in Europe in some countries, but the overall trend, nevertheless, is one of slower growth. Goods inflation remains negative. In fact, China has continued to export deflation. So that has been good news on the inflation front, even though obviously it does affect some of the manufacturers, and we've seen the serious problems in the car industry. I mean, frankly, the economy in Europe is under stress, and on that alone, you would expect interest rates to come down by 50 basis points. There are, of course, dissenting voices saying we need to watch it, and inflation, in fact, may sort of resurface. But in reality, inflation goes up and down, and it is in a way, if you look at the remit, not one that is requiring inflation to be constantly at 2%. In fact, we've seen it being below that in Europe before. What you need is to have a sustainable path to get there. And if the economy slows down and there are still all these problems with Germany and other countries, then the push for higher inflation, the underlying higher inflation, is just not going to be there. And we've seen a number of indicators suggest that actually, we are not going to see a resurgence in the price increases of the type that we had seen before, and high interest rates really don't help anyone.
They certainly don't. Vicky Pryce from the CEBR, many thanks for your thoughts. And that's Market Insight. Don't forget you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.